Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I'm here to discuss the Wilds of Eldraine Prerelease that I attended this past weekend at Emerald Knights. This is the latest set for Magic the Gathering, featuring a return to Eldraine, which was a powerful set back in the day, and it was a lot of fun to draft as well, so I was looking forward to playing the sealed. Neither Wizards nor the store really offered much different from their usual pre-release experience, except that Emerald Knights threw in a bonus promo card for anyone who stuck through all of the games. In this case, it was the Harvester of Souls, so that is a nice bonus from Emerald Knights. But aside from sealed deck, there wasn't really much else to this particular experience. For the pre-release, you got one of these pre-release kits, and there was a little strip here that you rip open, and then you have a little bit of text here to help set the mood for the set that you're going to be opening. And then, as usual, there are these punch-out tokens and counters that you can use in the games, and I ended up needing them because I forgot to bring my dice with me in this particular one. There's also some art on the inside, but you know, that's going to be hard to use and keep. There is a deck box here with just a little bit more art from the set. This is really cute. It kind of reminds me of Disney development artwork. And then we have inside a spin down life counter. Mine is a black and purple one. It looks like this. And then, in addition, you get a card divider with a beanstalk worm on it, and the planeswalker symbol on the back. You have one of these fold-outs that explain how to build a pre-release deck if you don't have much experience doing this. And then on the other side, you have a little bit of information about the roll mechanic, as well as some cute gingerbread artwork to go with it. You also get a promo card as usual. In my case, I got the Gruff Triplets, which is a very strong card for limited, and it is one that you can use in your sealed deck experience, as well as a code for Arena. In this case, they'll get you 6 packs of Magic the Gathering. I've already used this code, and so I wouldn't bother trying to put this one in, but if I run across any more codes in the future, you will be able to grab them from me. And then you have 6 packs of Magic the Gathering, the contents of which are in here, and you open them up and build a sealed deck and play 3 matches at Emerald Knights. So this was my entire card pool, including the Gruff Triplets that I opened, and as you can see, there is a little bit of color imbalance here. Green was bonkers in terms of all the cards that I opened, and we even had some really strong cards in multiple formats, like Doubling Season here, and Unnatural Growth could be a really strong card, but it's also a card that requires 4 green mana, and I felt like that was really pushing it. And I would probably have to play, like 10, 12 forests in order for it to be a reasonable play. And when you're playing 2-color deck, it's hard to pull off, especially if you just have to play every green card that you have. And I don't think that I could have made a good deck with that. But because of that, I think green was a shoo-in in terms of one of the colors. The quality of the creatures was good. There was a removal in green. There were just some really strong cards. And one of my biggest problems in the Gruff Triplets in green. So that was in for sure. The next color of major note for me was black, and that's just because black had a ton of removal. And then some also decent cards, and the Mosswood Dread Knight also is a black adventure, and so there is a bit of synergy there that made me want to play black as well. And so that was a major consideration for the deck. The other colors I considered were blue, so that I can play Troyan, and I think there were some decent cards in blue as well, including one of my rares, but it was a more shallow color in terms of creatures, and so I would be forced to play a bit more into my green. And then red, because red also had a decent amount of removal in the cut-ins and the Frantic Firebolt and Torch the Tower as well. And so I think that there was enough going on in red that I could have considered it, and white really was just too thin of a card pool to really consider. And so in the end, I ended up playing green and black, and there were a lot of potential synergies here. One of the things that is interesting about this combination is the presence of doubling season, doubling up tokens. So I could get extra food tokens, for example, or I could get doubled roll tokens, which it would create an interesting effect because there's a lot of wicked tokens here, and when wicked tokens go into the graveyard, they would do my opponent 1 extra damage. And so that was one other thing I can consider for this color pair. Ultimately, I ended up leaning a little bit away from those roll and food considerations and built more of a deck that was just focused on really strong cards. And so I didn't end up playing cards like Garruk's Uprising because there wasn't enough creatures that would take advantage of it, or Doubling Season because I didn't have enough counter or token abilities, and couldn't play Unnatural Growth either because that would just require too many green cards. But I still had abundance of riches within these 2 colors, and so I went with black and green. So this is the deck that I built. I pretty much cut out all the non-creature spells that aren't some kind of removal, so everything here is some kind of removal. I figured if I can just kill all of my opponent's creatures, then I should be able to get through at the end. I have my bomb here in the Gruff Triplets, and then I decided to put the Hamlet Glutton in here because there are some foods and rolls that I should be able to sacrifice to bargain it out. And then otherwise it's just whatever I can play. And so I put the Mosswood Dread Knight here because it's pretty good value and recursive. So is the Red Tooth Vanguard. Tough Cookie can do a beating, and the Wicked Visitor is just a dude. But it's a dude that can occasionally drain a little extra life. And then the Stingblade Assassin is also quasi-removal in the end. I think the Fairy Dream Thief is a great turn 1 play if you can play it early. And yeah, just some decent cards and ways to get through. A little bit of play with food and a little bit of play with rolls. On top of this, I added 9 forests and 8 swamps. I leaned a little heavier towards the forest so that I will be able to more reliably cast Gruff Triplets. And that is my deck. Now to move on to the games that I played. Now to discuss the games. In the very first match, I played against a blue and green player who was playing with a lot of powerful enchantments. Unfortunately for the other player, in the first game, my opponent couldn't really field any creatures, and they played a lot of powerful enchantments with no creatures to take advantage of them, so I just went in and smashed and beat my opponent before they could play anything to benefit their enchantments. And then in the second game, it was almost a similar situation, except that I had removal spells and they did play some creatures, but I killed them all, and with only 10 creatures in the deck, as I found out after the match, they just couldn't keep much of a board presence, and so I just rolled over them because there was nothing that they could do except for playing enchantments and then just taking all my hits to the face. And so the first match was a little bit of an imbalance. I think my opponent was a little too ambitious with their deck building because it was all enchantments and high drop creatures, and there wasn't a lot for them to do earlier in the game except play cards that didn't really affect the board state. And so that was perhaps a little too easy because of that. And then I went into the second match, and this opponent was playing a black-red deck, and I won the dice roll. I went first in the first game, and I proceeded to draw all my expensive cards and no lands. And so my opponent pretty quickly trounced me because there was nothing that I was able to do once my few cards that I could play were destroyed. In the second game, I was on a play again, and then I had to take a mulligan to 6 because I drew a 1-lander, and then I kept the 2-lander with a bunch of expensive cards as before, and didn't draw anything that was inexpensive for the entire game, and so pretty much got trampled over again and lost back to back due to drawing very poorly in terms of both my deck composition, which favored 2-drops actually, and also not drawing lands when I needed them, and then by the point I was drawing lands, not being able to do much except for playing one thing in a turn, and while my opponent was stomping my face in. And so that was perhaps some kind of karma for the ease at which I defeated my first opponent. And then I went into the third match 1-1. In the third match, my opponent and I were fairly even. At first, I was on the draw and my opponent was playing a white, black, and green deck. Ultimately, the games came down to my opponent having a lot more focus with their themes. They had a very strong food, payoff, and generation thing going on. And then they played Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, which is an enchantment that will let your foods tap for mana, which gave them a bit of mana acceleration to play into their other cards. And then you can sacrifice it to give your creatures a power and toughness boost equivalent to the number of foods you had. And since my opponent was able to generate a lot of foods, they were basically able to run down my board and force me to block poorly. And then I lost, especially because I was just top decking lands at that point. And so there was no winning for me in the first game. In the second game, it was a very similar situation. I was actually able to stabilize eventually by playing the Gruff triplets, but my opponent was able to play Knight of the Sweet's Revenge again with a ton of food on the board, and then proceeded to force me to chomp with all three of my Gruff triplets, thanks to that Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. And from there, it was just my opponent drawing better than me and having me at a significant life disadvantage. And so that ended with me going 1-2 with all my matches and getting completely face rolled in my second two matches, which, as I mentioned before, might be a bit of karma for how easily I trounced my very first opponent. But it doesn't matter how many wins or losses that you take at Emerald Knights. They have a flat prize structure, and everybody got 2 packs of Wilds of Eldraine in addition to the promo, which for me was the Harvester of Souls. And so I like the fact that that takes the pressure off of you for winning and makes the bad feels and hyper-competitiveness die down when you are playing at the store. The promo also really helps make the experience feel just a little bit nicer. I do wish that Wizards offered something a little bit more than just the pre-release experience. I think that the set is a lot of fun. It's also one of the wackiest non-silver border Magic sets because of all the food creatures that are pretty silly, but it is also a fun set, and the fairy tale theme does come through, not as strongly as the first set. This is picking up additional fairy tale themes and just leaning a little bit more into fairies, and the monstrous food sort of themes are probably the most notable things that the plane of Eldraine has to offer. But I had a good time with the pre-release, even though pretty much every single game that I played was lopsided, and that's because I had a really cool deck with a lot of fun cards, and I got to say that I was destroyed by a Scream Buff, which is pretty fun in terms of puns. And so that was my experience with the Wilds of Eldraine pre-release. If you went to a pre-release, share your pre-release experience with us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.